In many ways, we're hardwired to learn from failure, whether, kids know this. It's taking those first few steps, learning to play the piano. Nobody calls it piano fail. Call it piano practice. Something happens as we become adults, though. We start to exert more control over our surroundings, do things we already know how to do. And I get it, the stakes are higher as adults, but that doesn't mean we can allow ourselves to stop trying, to stop practicing, to stop pushing ourselves to the edge of our capacities. And I would argue this is where our school system is failing us. At least the schools that I went to tended to value testing over learning. Very early on, my capacity was tested. As it turns out, I am awful at just about everything associated with creativity. Drawing, singing, painting, music, art, dance, poetry, you name it. I am bad at it. On the other hand, I happen to be half decent at science and math, put me firmly in the science nerd category. But of course, these labels are ridiculous. Just because I'm not traditionally creative doesn't mean I can't create. There's art and creativity in the most groundbreaking science, and there's science and precision in the most wonderful works of art. And not to suggest that this is a groundbreaking piece of science, but in my grade 9 biology class, I decided to microwave my bean seeds. Honestly, just wanted to see what would happen. Secretly, I was hoping they would mutate. But as it turns out, my desire to create Teenage Mutant Ninja Beans doesn't actually earn you any marks. I was supposed to learn about photosynthesis, how plants grow, something like that. I didn't. What I learned is that if you put your bean seeds in the microwave, it stunts the growth of the plant. Anything more than 25 seconds, seed doesn't germinate at all. I thought that was kind of cool. My teacher did not. So when my seeds didn't grow, I failed. And I want you to consider that story and use it as a catalyst to unlearn everything that school taught you about failure. This idea of testing over learning is insane. You think that all the world needed of us was to be automatons, solving problems that have already been solved, asking no questions for 8 hours a day. In many ways, schools, or at least the ones that I went to, teach us to be consumers of knowledge. We take in information, spew it back out when we're asked. And don't get me wrong, I love learning from others. But when are we taught to self-authorize, to shake things up, do things differently, to truly create? I want every single person in this room to see yourself as a producer. And it's scary, and we're not taught how, and it will probably lose you marks on your bean project. But the world needs more from us than to be automatons simply doing what we're told. We are never going to imagine and discover the solutions to our most important and complex problems by consuming. We have to self-authorize to solve the problems we haven't been told how to yet. Of course, that's very hard. Because when we produce, experiment, try, create, we put a piece of ourselves out there for the world to judge. And when that doesn't go well, when we fail, it feels awful. So I want to dive into that a little bit deeper for the rest of the talk. I want every single person here to think of a time that you failed. Don't worry, I won't make you share it with anyone. But when was a time that you tried something that really mattered to you and it didn't work? What did that feel like? How did you react? What went through your head in the midst of that failure? We tend to take our failures rather personally, framing the narrative in our head in a way that's quite permanent and pervasive. As an example, not too long ago, I gave the closing keynote for the W100 event. It's an event that gathers all the top female entrepreneurs in Canada. Big deal to me. It was probably the worst talk I have ever given. And as I walked off the stage and out of that venue, my head hung in shame, I unlocked my bicycle, the skies opened up, and it poured rain. And on that miserable, soggy ride home, the only things that were going through my head were, I am a failure. I'm a loser. I'm not smart. I'm not good enough. I'm an embarrassment. All statements that are personal, pervasive, persistent. And you know, I'm a full-time failure. This is my job. And I still felt that shame. So I can say with a certain amount of confidence that most of us could do with a little practice decoupling ego from activity in times of failure. And that's what I want to practice now. I want you to think of that same failure, but I want us to reframe that failure in terms of the effort we put in and what we learned. So what that sounds like for my story, instead of I'm a failure, I'd instead frame it as, I tried to write a good talk, tried really hard, but the messages just didn't land with the audience. What I learned and what I'm going to do differently going forward is when I acknowledge that my messages aren't resonating, I'm going to find the courage to stop, to ask the audience what they want to talk about, and draw from whatever confidence I have to change the talk on the spot and not be so attached to what I want the talk to be about. So, that's my story reframed. Now it's your turn. What does your failure sound like if you were going to tell it in terms of what you tried, the effort you put in, and what you learned? I'll give you a few seconds to think about that. The stories we tell ourselves are very important. I use this simple reframing exercise as a tool to start to build that more productive relationship with our failures. But I want to leave you with just one more tool, and for that, I'm going to call on my friend here, Benjamin Zander. Now, Benjamin Zander is an educator. He's also the conductor of the Boston Philharmonic Orchestra, and he has a few ideas about how we can build a more productive relationship with failure.
It's very important to be right. The teacher is always right, and the students try to be right, and as one of these young ladies said, the best way to be right is not to say anything, then you won't be wrong. Now, I believe the exact opposite, which is you cannot learn anything unless you make a mistake. So I tell my students, when you make a mistake, celebrate. And the way to celebrate is like this. How fascinating! It's actually quite difficult. Try it out on the golf course next time you're out. You know why it's difficult is because when we make a mistake, we tend to pull down, the body pull down. Notice the next time you make a mistake, the body pulls down. Now, instead, when it pulls down, you go, how fascinating. It's like this. It's difficult to do, you know.
Thank you, Ben. Always a pleasure. So this last exercise that I want you to do, perhaps you can guess what it is, but I want you to think of that failure. Really let yourself go back there. Remember what it was like to be in the midst of that failure. But instead of letting our bodies pull down, on the count of 3, we are all going to throw our arms up and yell, how fascinating! I can understand if you're feeling a little bit embarrassed or silly about this. It's okay, you can close your eyes so no one can see you, but for real, we are going to do this. All right, are you ready? I want you to think of your failure. Close your eyes if you need to. I'm going to do the same on stage. Really let yourself remember what it was like to be in that failure. Instead of letting our bodies pull down, on the count of 3, 1, 2, 3. How fascinating! What would our lives be like if every time we failed, instead of pointing fingers, we simply said, how fascinating. What did I learn? And every time our colleagues, peers, partners failed, instead of blaming or punishing, we went up to them with that same curiosity and appreciation and said, how fascinating. What did you learn? How much that would fundamentally reshape our relationship with failure.